Hey Ultrawide fans, today we have the much anticipated action RPG Forspoken. We will follow Faye into the world of Athia to see how well the NVIDIA 40 series and the AMD 7000 series cards work at our 4 Ultrawide and Super Ultrawide resolutions, with a bonus 1080p Ultrawide resolution tested with just the 7900 XT and the RTX 4070. I will discuss my thoughts on the gameplay, overall graphics presentation, performance characteristics, and my first impressions of the story that I have experienced so far. All gameplay was captured using the 4090 at 4K Ultrawide with RT and DLSS on. First, I'll walk you through my test path. We start out at the rest point. We start magic parkouring across the rock and the wall, then down onto this purple rock here, jump, run past this little rock, down the path, jump. I get into this quick combat encounter. I make sure to keep all the enemies in front of me during the encounter, so I'm facing the same direction for most of the time. Make sure to use one of the big AoE spells so that the effects are the same each time, and then I just pummel them with the standard attack. Once the encounter is over, I close the level up window right away, and then I continue running in the direction I was facing, and I make sure to jump off this rock every time, and I continue running in this direction until I run out of time. Now you'll see it'll take me even longer to go through all the menus and accept all the warnings than it does to load the game back to the beginning of the run. I have this game installed on a Gen 4 NVMe drive, which provides the stellar load times you just witnessed. Honestly, I get a little bit of a dopamine hit every time I see this game load so fast. This path was run 3 times for each resolution, setting, and card, for over 250 runs of this test path, and I have a repeatability of sub 1 FPS between runs. All the benchmark data was collected using the test bench featuring an AMD R7 5800X 3D with 32GB of 3200 CL14 memory, with the game running on a Samsung 990 Pro 2TB NVMe SSD on Windows 11 and running the latest AMD and NVIDIA drivers available at the time of testing. First, let's look at our 4K Ultrawide data. Here we see that the RTX 4090 stands alone with a 38% performance advantage over the 4080, barely scraping its way to the 60 FPS line with its raster performance, and its 1% lows are in acceptable territory at 49 FPS, which results in a fine-feeling play experience. With DLSS turned on, the 4090 is now in all smooth territory, with an 86 FPS average and a 62 FPS 1% low, providing a very nice play experience. Moving one performance tier down, we see a very competitive environment between the RTX 4080 and the RX 7900 XTX, with only 2 FPS separating their raw raster performance, with it coming in at 43 FPS and 41 FPS respectively, and a 3 FPS difference in the 1% lows at 37 and 34 FPS respectively. A playable experience, but one that will leave you reaching for that DLSS and FSR toggle. Once that toggle is flipped, both cards will provide you with a smooth average frame rate and a tight 1% low in the 50s, providing a good play experience that is pretty indistinguishable from each other, despite the 4080 having a 6% performance advantage for the average. For those with less rich tastes, we have our 7900 XTX and an RTX 4070 Ti. We see a dead heat with both cards providing a 35 FPS average, and we see the 4070 Ti's 1% low only 2 FPS behind that of the 7900 XTs. When the FSR and DLSS are turned on, the 4070 Ti falls behind the 7900 XT, but not by much. 5% at the average and 10% behind for the 1% lows, which seems like a pretty good result for the 4070 Ti considering the price difference. But not all is as it seems. The RTX 4070 Ti's meager 12GB of memory is not enough to play Forspoken at this resolution, and rather than give you a stuttery performance by constantly swapping textures in and out of memory, the game just dumps the textures altogether, leaving you with worse than 1080p texture quality in some areas, like the cape. You can also see the stones of the porch are lower resolution, and the tree loses the texture of the bark, leaving just a flat color behind. Grass density and faraway object detail don't seem to be affected, This loss of textures makes me worry for the future-proofness of the 4070 Ti. At 4K ultrawide, even the RTX 4080 is right at the edge of what the game requires with its 16GB of video memory. The 4090 and 7900 XTX suck down 18GB worth of data to their VRAM when ray tracing is turned on and no DLSS or FSR is used. With that said, let's look at the ray tracing performance. When turning on ray tracing, we see all cards take a very reasonable FPS hit of around 15%. No surprise to anyone, the 4090 is still way out in front with a 47% performance advantage, delivering 50 FPS for the average and 42 FPS 1% lows. When we turn on DLSS, we actually see our ray tracing performance beat our stock raster performance by 23%, delivering a 74 FPS for the average and 56 FPS for the 1% low, for a smooth and enjoyable gameplay experience. Looking at our 4080 and 7900 XTX battle, we see both lose 15% performance, going from raster to our ray tracing performance. Despite what many would expect, we see no RT advantage for the 4080 in this game. Things are actually even tighter than the raster results, with the 4080 providing 2 FPS more for the average, and the 7900 XTX giving you 1 more FPS for the 1% low. Turning on DLSS and FSR, we see both cards getting 32% more performance than raster, providing an acceptable gameplay experience with 57 and 55 FPS averages, and 46 and 43 FPS 1% lows, providing a fine play experience, but one leaving you lusting after the 4090. Looking at the sub $1,000 cards, we see what appears to be a victory for the cheaper 4070 Ti. But once again, the 4070 Ti's tiny VRAM is taking all of your textures and throwing them right in the garbage for a distractingly poor visual experience. Neither card is providing a playable experience with just ray tracing, and even with DLSS and FSR getting their averages to acceptable range, the overall experience is a bit too slow and will affect your combat efficiency. Since this is a native resolution of my production monitor, and right now my production machine is also my gaming machine, this is the resolution I'll be playing the game at. I will be choosing to play Forspoken with ray tracing on and with DLSS quality on, powered by the RTX 4090. I have found that this combination of settings provides stunning crisp visuals, while still providing a smooth and enjoyable play experience. Now let's see what these cards can do at a more reasonable resolution. Moving down in resolution, but out in width, we have our 1440p Super Ultrawide class monitors. As expected, we see the 4090 way out in front with a 34% performance advantage over the next closest GPU, delivering 74 FPS average and a 1% low that is stuck under 60 at 57 FPS. This still provides a good play experience, though not as high a refresh rate as one would hope to see when using a 4090. When DLSS is turned on, we see our average make it into high refresh rate territory for the first time, delivering 97 FPS with a 67 FPS 1% low. We see our frame variance increase from our raster results, but we're still getting a smooth play experience. Moving down in performance tier, we again see our RTX 4080 and RX 7900 XTX effectively tied, with only 3 FPS difference between them, at 55 and 52 FPS respectively, putting them both in the acceptable performance range, with their 1% lows equally close at 45 and 43 FPS. Even when turning on DLSS and FSR, we see only 3 FPS difference, with the two cards delivering 76 and 73 FPS, and 1% lows at 57 and 56 FPS, with both cards providing a smooth gameplay experience. In our sub $1 grand class of card, we see another tie at base raster for the 7900 XTX and the 4070 Ti, in both the average and the 1% low, with our cards reaching the very edge of acceptable frame rates at 44 and 45 FPS. When FSR and DLSS are turned on, we again see a tie for the average frame rate, but the 7900 XT is providing a 13% better 1% low. At this resolution, again we see the 4070 Ti's memory cause it to have worse visuals than the 7900 XT, though it's not as bad as it was at 4K ultrawide, with only intermittent drops in texture clarity depending on when a scene manages to clip the memory limit. DLSS mostly eliminates this for raster by reducing the memory needed. Now, let's take a look at our ray tracing experience. Again, we see the same 15% reduction in performance when turning on ray tracing across most of our cards. The RTX 4090 still hangs on to smooth refresh rate performance with a 63 FPS average and 1% lows in acceptable range at 48 FPS. With DLSS, we again see better than raster performance with a smooth 85 FPS average and a near smooth 59 FPS 1% low, providing a very good gaming experience. Again, we see 3 FPS difference between our RTX 4080 and 7900 XTX results, coming in at 48 and 45 FPS respectively, though we see a 10% better 1% low with the 4080 at 40 FPS than the 7900 XTX, which is getting 36 FPS. With DLSS and FSR on, we see Mr. 3 FPS difference show up again, with a 68 and 65 FPS for the two cards. But this time, the 1% low is tied at 50 FPS. Both cards' upscaling experience is providing you with an enjoyable play experience at this resolution. That won't leave you yearning for the 4090. Now let's look at the 7900 XT and the 4070 Ti. Again, we see another close battle, but with the 4070 Ti seeming to have the raw ray tracing edge, delivering 40 FPS average to the 7900 XT's 38, and 1% lows of 34 and 31 respectively. Though with the increased in memory demands of ray tracing, we're seeing the 4070 Ti's textures be completely dumped again. With DLSS and FSR are switched on, we see the near tie at the average of 55 and 56 FPS, but a 10% advantage for the 7900 XT with the 1% lows coming in at 44 and 40 FPS. These cards provide a frame rate that you could play at, but you'd be wishing you spent the money for the tier above. If I were to play at this resolution, I would still choose to play with ray tracing and DLSS turned on, and I would be happy with the performance of the RX 7900 XTX or the RTX 4080. The 4090 obviously provides the best experience, but it's not necessary unless you're a stickler for never using upscaling. Then the 4090 gives you the grunt to play on a super ultrawide while keeping your RTFX on. Let's move back to our 21:9 monitors and see if we can't get some 1% lows above 60 FPS. Next up are 1600p ultrawide performance results. Here we see the 4090 performing 30% ahead of any other card, with an 84 FPS average and a 1% low that clears 60 Hz barrier for the first time, to deliver 67 FPS, for a very smooth play experience. When DLSS is used, we again get into high refresh rate territory, with 107 FPS and 1% lows of 77 FPS. Moving down a tier, we see both the RTX 4080 and the 7900 XTX deliver smooth gameplay averages of 65 and 63 FPS respectively, with 1% lows of 49 and 51 FPS for an effective dead tie, with your choice being to have your 2 FPS advantage on the average or the 1% low. Both provide an equally smooth and playable game. When DLSS and FSR are used, we see the 4080 nearly hit high refresh rates, with an average FPS of 89, and the 7900 XTX 5 FPS behind at 84, with only 1 FPS separating their 1% lows at 64 and 63 FPS respectively, for a gameplay experience that stays completely in the smooth range. One performance tier lower, we are finally seeing apples to apples gameplay, with the 4070 Ti's memory no longer being exceeded by the game textures. Now we see the 7900 XT with a slight lead in the average frame rate with 53 FPS to the 4070 Ti's 50 FPS, but it's the 1% lows where the 7900 XT gets its 16% lead, delivering 43 FPS to the 37 FPS of the 4070 Ti. When we turn on FSR and DLSS, we see both cards jump up in raster performance to 74 and 69 FPS respectively. But while we see good 1% lows for the 7900 XT at 58 FPS, the 4070 Ti is only seeing 43 FPS, resulting in a 38% frame variance, which is going to feel a bit choppy, especially since it's dipping well below 60. The 7900 XT puts in a fine performance, but the 4070 Ti leaves something to be desired. I'm not sure if this is the low memory rearing its ugly head, or what is causing the suboptimal 1% lows. Let's see how things shake out with ray tracing. The ray tracing performance hit is quite steady, with our cards still seeing a 15% reduction on average. The 4090 is getting a smooth average frame rate of 71 FPS and a 1% low of 54 FPS, which is on its own would provide a good gameplay experience. But when we use DLSS, we see our ray tracing results reach high refresh rates for the first time at 93 FPS and a smooth 1% low of 63 FPS. Our 4080 and 7900 XTX duo is once again only 3 FPS apart, with 56 and 53 FPS averages respectively, with equally tight 1% lows at 45 and 43 FPS respectively, again providing an indistinguishable play experience. When we turn DLSS and FSR on, things get odd for the 4080. It and the 7900 XT deliver a 75 FPS average, but the 4080 actually regresses with its 1% low, providing 44 FPS, while the 7900 XTX provides 55 FPS 1% lows, a 25% better result, meaning the 7900 XTX gets a better all-around play experience with FSR, while the 4080 actually feels choppier than without DLSS. I retested the 4080 results at a later date and got the exact same average and a slightly worse 1% low than my first test recorded. Down another performance tier, we see a direct tie in both the average and the 1% low for the 7900 XT and the 4070 Ti, with both delivering 45 FPS averages and 36 FPS 1% lows. They stay tied using FSR and DLSS with a smooth average of 63 FPS, but the 7900 XT has a modest advantage in the 1% low, providing 49 FPS to the 4070 Ti's 43 FPS. This is a better relative result for the 4070 Ti than it saw with its raster performance, which means both cards are providing a fine play experience at this resolution. At this resolution, all the cards offer a viable play experience with ray tracing when using upscaling, though even at this resolution, only the RTX 4090 can keep its 1% lows above 60 while ray tracing, whereas the RTX 4080 and the RX 7900 XTX are only able to make that claim with their raster performance. Finally, we arrive at our 1440p ultrawide class of monitors. Here we see our RTX 4090 hit high refresh rates without upscaling for the first time, delivering 94 FPS for the average and 68 FPS for the 1% low. When DLSS is turned on, we see it closing in on very high refresh rates but not quite making it, with a 114 FPS average and a 77 FPS 1% low. Our 4080 and 7900 XTX are doing it again, asking whether you want your extra 1 FPS on your average or your 1% low, with their averages coming in at 72 and 71 FPS and their 1% lows coming in at 55 and 56 FPS respectively. When DLSS and FSR are turned on, we see the 4080 get a small lead with a 96 FPS average to the 7900 XTX's 92 FPS and 1% lows of 70 and 67 FPS respectively. One tier down, we see the 7900 XT and the 4070 Ti in a tight race with 60 and 58 FPS averages respectively, and 1% lows of 49 and 43 FPS, giving the 7900 XT a modest advantage. With our FSR and DLSS on, we see a nice average frame rate for both cards of 81 and 77 FPS, though the 7900 XT does get a modest lead in the 1% lows, getting 61 FPS to the 4070 Ti's 53 FPS, for some very playable frame rates from both cards. At this resolution, if you were to play using raster settings, I would probably skip DLSS and FSR for the 4090, 4080, and XTX, because it can add some softness to the image, and you're already getting good enough FPS for this game without it. Now, let's see how our ray tracing results shake out. Again, we see the same 15% performance hit for our cards when turning on ray tracing effects. Ray tracing keeps the 4090 from staying completely above 60 FPS. While it gets 79 FPS for the average, the 1% lows dip to 57 FPS. DLSS is still delivering high refresh rates of 101 FPS for the average and smooth 67 FPS for the 1% low, for what is a great gameplay experience. With our 4080 and 7900 XTX class, we are seeing somewhat of a shakeup. The ray tracing results see the 4080 still 2 FPS ahead, delivering 62 smooth frames, to the 7900 XTX's 60. But for the 1% lows, we see the 4080 drop 6 FPS behind the 7900 XTX, delivering 43 FPS to the XTX's 49 FPS, making the 7900 XTX the better performer despite having lower average frame rates. And when we turn DLSS and FSR on for the first time, we see the 7900 XTX with a higher average FPS, even if it's only at 1 FPS advantage, with the 4080 delivering 81 FPS to the XTX's 82 FPS. But the 1% lows are where the 4080 suffers, continuing the trend of poor DLSS 1% lows for this card, with only 48 FPS to the XTX's 57, making the 7900 XTX 19% faster with its 1% lows at this resolution. Down a tier, we see another dead heat between the 7900 XT and the RTX 4070 Ti, with the 7900 XT delivering 51 FPS average to the 4070 Ti's 52 FPS average, and the 1% lows are both 41 FPS. When turning on DLSS and FSR, we see both cards delivering 70 FPS average, and a close 50 and 48 FPS for the 1% lows respectively, providing both cards a good play experience. It's so hard to say no to the ray tracing when it's only costing you 15% of your frame rate, or 10% in the 4070 Ti's case, although I do feel like that forces your hand on using DLSS or FSR, which can soften the image at this resolution. It's a trade I'm willing to make, but I do wish it wasn't one I needed to do. Now let's check out that bonus resolution. Yes, that's right, a 5th resolution, the venerable 1080p Ultrawide. We will only be testing our 2 sub-$1,000 cards here. At this resolution you can see the 7900 XT stretch its raster legs and deliver a nice 82 FPS average to the 4070 Ti's 76 FPS. The 7900 XT keeps its 1% lows and smooth gameplay range at 63 FPS, while the 4070 Ti dips to 52 FPS. When they use FSR and DLSS, we see higher refresh rates for both cards of 102 and 93 FPS respectively, and smooth 1% lows of 79 and 62 FPS. Despite achieving high refresh rates with upscaling, I would not recommend using it at this resolution. It's an obvious detriment to the visuals, and you just don't need it, with the cards already delivering good frame rates. Let's see if we can say the same for the ray tracing. With the RTFX turned on, we see a 17% dip in the average for the 7900 XT and a 12% dip for the 4070 Ti. We still see both cards hanging on to smooth gameplay, with the 7900 XT delivering 68 FPS to the 4070 Ti's 67 FPS, an effective tie. But it's the 1% lows where the 7900 XT managed to make a difference, delivering 51 FPS to the 4070 Ti's 43 FPS. With DLSS and FSR turned on, we see the 7900 XT maintain a small lead, delivering 88 FPS versus 83 FPS for the 4070 Ti, and 1% lows of 62 and 55 FPS respectively. Even with the ray tracing performance hit, I would still not use FSR with the 7900 XT, but it might be worth using DLSS with the 4070 Ti to get those 1% lows a bit higher. Both cards can find their way to a very playable frame rate, while avoiding the blurriness and added by upscaling at this resolution. While the 4070 Ti has a slightly better price to performance by the numbers, if you're planning to get a 4070 Ti, you have to be sure you're not going to be getting a high resolution monitor before you change your graphics card. So how does this game perform? There was a lot of fretting after the demo and the release of the PC specs that this game would be a dog performance-wise, and when you see the benchmark results, where the 4090 can't even clear 60 FPS 1% lows on our Super Ultrawide with DLSS on, or hit 120 FPS average at 1440p Ultrawide with DLSS, you might think that it would confirm that Forspoken is a dog. But in all of my 250 runs, I never experienced a hitch or a hiccup in this game. It is a smooth operator, and if you can get your average FPS to 60, you'll have a damn fine time in this game. We haven't even talked about Forspoken's performance showpiece. Its amazing load times. They are stunningly fast, and I get a little giddy every time I see how fast it loads. This game, and new games like it, will end the days of a SATA SSD being as good as an NVMe one for loading games. Okay, it's a stutter-free presentation, but are the graphics worth the low frame rate? In a lot of ways, yes they are. But there are some places in the game where you definitely question it. The exploration portion of the game world is quite beautiful, with tons of grass everywhere that reacts when you blast through it with your magic run. The textures are sharp and detailed, and the particle effects really wow. All the animals and characters have strand hair a la Hairworks or Tress FX. Frey's character model is exquisite. She is very human and natural in all of her movements and facial expressions. All of her clothing and accessories are fully 3D modeled, layered, and move in ways you'd expect. Though, the same cannot be said for all the NPCs, especially the throwaway ones like townspeople, vendors, and minor quest givers. They are all rigid both physically and verbally. The main city itself is a bit bleak. It's a border fort turned into a refugee camp, but still, it doesn't need to look this boring. Now, let's talk about gameplay. We will start with the good. The adventuring part of this game is good, the traversal is fun and very fluid, and the combat is a blast, even with the limited toolset I have now. The enemies are not idiots, they try really hard to flank you and often succeed, forcing you to turn around to address them, opening yourself up to a rush from behind. Even after my hours of repeating the same section over and over again, I'm still excited to jump back in and explore. The cutscenes that I have seen so far are well animated and good looking, though they are in 16:9. I'll make a post if I find a good fix for it. Now for the not so good. Any dialogue with non-important NPCs locks you in place, and they are stiff and lifeless. Dialogue with these NPCs is very flat and uninteresting.
That I do. There's not a lot happens in this town I don't come to know of eventually.
They also made the super strange decision. Whenever you use a dialogue tree to talk with your vambrace, you get locked in place and can't explore while they monologue. In a normal game, I would say they were covering for a bunch of background loading, but that is completely unnecessary in this game. Lastly, is the beginning of the game. I get that they are trying to give you some backstory on who Frey is, but it's the least compelling way to start a game about dragons and magic that I have seen. Just get through the 30 minutes of New York and forget it happened. Everything is better in Athia. All that said, as soon as I get some spare time, I'm going to be playing more Forspoken. Thanks for watching. I hope this video is useful for you. If it was, please like and subscribe so you can catch the upcoming benchmarks of the 4090 and 4070 Ti. If I helped you make a purchasing decision, please consider using one of my affiliate links in the description. It would really help this channel out. If you are excited to play Forspoken, or if there's another big release you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. I'm Scott, and I've been your guide to Athia. Have a great day.
Whoa!
Nice! Full steam ahead!
I need to take this thing down, and fast.
You'll only hurt more innocents if you
Huh?
don't.
What's up with our friend?
Losing one's wings does make flying something of a challenge.